I'm joined by Amos Hochstein. Of course, we all know him as a former senior advisor to President Biden, an individual who was counting the barrels when they were also dealing with an energy crisis. He's now at TWG as a global managing partner. Amos, thank you so much for joining us. So the president has this Truth Social post. And I remember when you were also tracking every single barrel that was on the market. You were also tracking every single product that the United States was exporting or importing to try to help European allies. Is he correct here? Is Europe now, one, going to feel this shock? And can the United States maybe even come to the rescue?
Well, Anne-Marie, the shock started in Asia, right? So energy shocks take time to materialize because when Iran closed the straits by threatening to and demonstrating their willingness to shoot at tankers, the shock starts then, but the feeling of the shock only starts several days, if not weeks later, because there are ships on the water that are on the way. Countries have storage. The unsanctioned Russian on the water barrels. So there's some product and oil that's coming through for several days. And then the crunch starts. We've seen that in Asia, where they're stopping flights, they're stopping domestic flights, they are conserving energy. Some countries have moved to a 4-day work week, like Sri Lanka. There are countries that have, like Thailand, that have told people to stay home and work from home, back to COVID days. There are countries that have already said that the business side should stay home. So then it moves to Europe, right, because it's moving around the world. And then after Europe, it comes to the United States. We are more self-reliant, but we're not entirely self-reliant. We import a lot into California during the year. We import in the summer into the East Coast. And we don't always have the ability to move product around the United States. We don't have enough infrastructure, pipelines to move things around. So this crunch eventually comes to us. And by the way, one accident in the United States, and we have a problem. Valero just had an accident at their refinery in Texas last week. It's still not fully back up to operation. They make jet fuel.
Well, let's hope we don't get there. Let's stick on Europe for a minute. Politico has a story about the European Commission asking member countries to consider cutting back on oil and gas. Are they going to have to do that? What sort of policies do you think the European Union could put in place?
You know, when I was at the White House, one of the things that I worried most about was not sounding like Jimmy Carter telling Americans to wear a sweater in the last time that we had an energy crisis in the United States. The Europeans are coming very close to that. I hope they learn the lesson, the political lesson. Don't tell people to, to travel or bike to work. But look, for Americans, there is no doubt that this spring is going to be a very different expectation than what they had before, as far as gasoline and diesel for their cars and trucks, and for their travel by air. Jet fuel surcharges are coming to the airlines, and they're already here, and they will surge going forward, because airlines have to fly to other countries where they have to fill up. And if there's no jet fuel there, then they won't fly there.
You've dealt with the Europeans a lot, though. Just taking a step back, what do you make of their messaging and how they're dealing with this White House? The United Kingdom said that maybe they would send the Navy after the conflict was over. Spain is closing its airspace. Italy, apparently, according to one report, wasn't letting a U.S. aircraft land at space. Who is the United States dealing with right now when it comes to a leadership in Europe, which feels very fragmented?
Well, Europe definitely is fragmented. There's no unified position of the EU. And there are outliers. Spain is an outlier, and I will say Spain was an outlier during the Biden administration. It has taken this leadership, plagued with its own scandals, has been taking a very hard-line, anti-American, generally. And almost
pro-China.
Look, this is a country that I don't believe we should be doing business with when it comes to sensitive technology, because they've allowed Huawei into their intelligence systems, right? This past summer, they granted them a contract for their wiretapping for their intelligence community. So I put Spain aside. I think the Europeans, though, fundamentally say, look, NATO and our alliance is when one is attacked, the other is attacked. You know, one for all and all for one. Their view is the United States wasn't attacked. This was a decision to go into preemptive war that no one really understood, wasn't lobbied for. We didn't have months of explanation of why we were going to war. It was a decision and then an expectation that they join. And I think that's where the resentment is. You took us for granted. You didn't even come and tell us why you were going to war and then told us we had to go.
The heads up was the issue for the Europeans. They wanted to be on the same page.
And the deliberation, understanding what's the goal, what's the cause of the war.
Well, I think this administration was consistent on the three things. They don't want Iran to have a nuclear weapon. They want to get rid of their ambitions when it comes to long-range ballistic missiles, and they want them to stop funding proxies around the region, which are terrorism.
Well, number one, nuclear was obliterated in the summer, and there's no evidence that there's been almost any attacks in this war on the nuclear facilities because they've largely been damaged, and there was no restart of any nuclear activity. On the missiles, yes, but there was plenty of time for that. There was no time crunch to go after nothing. There was no precipitating event on Iranian missiles. It is important to take out those missiles, without a doubt. There was no negotiation attempted. There was no urgency on the missiles. And support for the proxies, no doubt. But Anne-Marie, the support for the proxies is largely financial. Iran was making more money in we could have shut down their oil trade in 2025. We didn't. They grew to 2 million barrels a day. They were making more money. In fact, they're making more money since the war started. They're selling more oil at a significantly higher price without sanctions.
With the unsanctioned Iran oil at sea. I just want to end on the United States. $4 a gallon. Psychologically, what does that do to a White House, or does we need to wait for it to get to $5?
$4 is already a psychological barrier, not for the White House, but for the American people. Seeing those prices, those stickers as they drive by and walk by gas stations, and the toll being taken, that is already taking the toll. I think the bigger issue, and when I was at the White House, we talked a lot about gasoline, but privately, I told everybody from the president on down that we should worry much more about diesel. And the diesel prices have risen more than the gasoline. We're having a hard time making enough diesel in the United States. And diesel is what will determine ultimately the increase in prices on food and on everything we buy on Amazon or any other retailer. It comes to us on a truck. And the trucks are having to pay that price. And remember, a lot of trucks with our products and farm products come from California, where the prices are over $6, are at $6 a gallon. That is, and diesel prices going over $7 and $8. So those are going to affect American consumers in the coming days and weeks. And I think next week is going to be that week where the shock in Asia to Europe starts playing out in the United States. And you know, on a Monday and Tuesday, the president talks about negotiations. We've had that now for 2 weeks in a row. Monday, Tuesday is about negotiations. By Thursday, the market realizes there's no real negotiation. The idea of ending the war with the straits closed is not really ending the war. So we haven't been presented with anything except for vague talk about an end of war. We don't know how this war ends yet. And as we sit here Tuesday, we're no different than we were last Tuesday. And it's just discussion of it. It's managing the markets. So I think from the market perspective, we're still underpricing oil. We are underpricing economic impacts of this energy shock.